The sound wasn't a scream, it was quieter, yet infinitely more devastating. It was the sharp, mechanical beep-beep of a boarding scanner, flashing red, followed by a heavy sigh that sucked the oxygen out of gate K-12. Dr. David Carter stood frozen, his hand still extended, holding his family's passports, while the woman behind the podium didn't even look up from her screen. She just flicked her wrist a dismissal, more insulting than a slap. "Step aside," she said, her voice dripping with a terrifying mixture of boredom and malice. I said, "Step aside. You aren't flying today." At that moment, Patricia Higgins, a gate agent with 20 years of unchecked authority, thought she was just clearing seats for a VIP. She had no idea she had just made the single most expensive mistake in the history of Meridian Airways. The fluorescent lights of Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 3 hummed with that specific, headache-inducing frequency that only weary travelers seem to hear. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a grey mid-December sky threatened snow, the kind of heavy wet slush that grounded flights and ruined Christmases. Dr. David Carter adjusted the strap of his duffel bag, wincing slightly. He was a man accustomed to 18-hour shifts in the operating theatre, removing gliomas and repairing aneurysms with steady hands. But the stress of travelling with a toddler was a different kind of fatigue. Beside him, his wife, Michelle, rocked their 3-year-old son, Leo, who was blissfully asleep on her shoulder. "We made it," Michelle whispered, checking her watch. 40 minutes to spare. I thought that Uber driver was going to kill us on the Kennedy Expressway. David smiled, the lines around his eyes softening. "We're good. Boarding doesn't start for another 10 minutes. Let's just get near the gate, maybe find a corner to charge the iPad, just in case Leo wakes up and chooses violence." They were a picture of the American upper-middle class, though you wouldn't know it from their attire. David was in a faded grey hoodie and sweatpants, his recovery gear after a marathon surgery the day before. Michelle wore leggings and a messy bun. They were black, tired, and just wanted to get to Atlanta for Michelle's sister's wedding. As they approached gate K-12, the atmosphere shifted. It was subtle at first, like the drop in pressure before a thunderstorm. The gate area was crowded, anxious passengers, hovering like vultures around the podium. Behind the desk stood 2 agents. One was a young man, barely 20, typing furiously and looking terrified. The other was a woman in her late 50s, with hair dyed a severe shade of brassy blonde, pinned back so tightly it pulled at her temples. Her name tag pinned slightly askew on her navy blue Meridian Airways uniform read Patricia. Patricia Higgins didn't just work at the gate, she occupied it. She moved with the sluggish, deliberate confidence of someone who knew that in this specific square footage of the airport, she was God. She was currently chewing gum with an open mouth while staring down a frantic businessman. "I don't care what the app says, sir," Patricia droned, not making eye contact. "The overhead bins are full for Group 4. You check the bag or you don't fly. Pick one." The businessman sputtered, "But I'm Group 2, I just—" "Next," Patricia yelled over him, looking past his shoulder. David exchanged a look with Michelle. "Rough day at the office," he muttered. "Just keep your head down," Michelle advised, shifting Leo's weight. "I don't want any trouble. Let's just get on the bird." They found a small patch of carpet near the window. David pulled out his phone. He had a notification from the hospital, a follow-up on a patient he'd operated on 2 days ago. Stable. He exhaled. The hardest part of his week was over. Now it was just family time. Attention passengers of Meridian Flight 492 to Atlanta. The loudspeaker crackled. It was Patricia's voice. "We are in an oversold situation. We are looking for volunteers to give up their seats for a voucher of $300. Please approach the podium." A collective groan went through the crowd. No one moved, $300 was an insult for a Friday evening flight before a holiday weekend. David watched the podium. He saw Patricia pick up the landline phone, her eyes scanning the waiting area. Her gaze swept over the crowd past the businessman, past a group of college students, and then settled. It settled on David and Michelle. She stared for a long, uncomfortable moment. David felt a prickle on the back of his neck. It was the same instinct he felt when a surgery was about to go wrong, the sense that a variable had just shifted against him. Patricia whispered something to the young agent, pointing subtly in their direction with a pen. The young agent looked up, saw the Carters, looked back at Patricia, and shook his head, slightly appearing hesitant. Patricia's face hardened. She snapped something at him, and he shrank back, typing obediently. "What was that about?" Michelle asked, noticing the tension in David's posture. "Probably nothing," David lied. "Maybe they like my hoodie." But he knew it wasn't the hoodie. He checked his boarding passes on his phone again. Group 1, seats 3A, 3B, 3C. They had paid full fare for first class, a treat David insisted on, so Michelle wouldn't have to wrestle a toddler in economy. They were legitimate. They were checked in. There was no reason to worry. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to begin boarding," Patricia announced. "We invite our first-class passengers and active military to board at this time." David stood up, grabbing the bags. "That's us. Let's go." They joined the short line for the priority lane. Ahead of them was an older couple, white, dressed in suits. Patricia scanned their passes with a beaming synthetic smile. "Have a wonderful flight, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson. Thank you for your loyalty." The Hendersons passed through. David stepped up to the podium, holding his phone out with the QR codes displayed. Michelle was right behind him, Leo stirring slightly in her arms. "Good evening," David said politely. Patricia didn't smile. She didn't speak immediately. She took a slow, deliberate sip from a water bottle, capping it tightly, before looking at David's phone. Then she looked at David. Then at Michelle. Then back at the phone. She didn't reach for the scanner. "I need to see physical IDs," she said flatly. David paused. "We're flying domestic. The TSA already checked our IDs at security. We just need to scan the boarding passes." "I need to see physical IDs," she repeated louder this time. "And the birth certificate for the child." "Birth certificate?" Michelle stepped forward. "He's 3. We bought a seat for him. He's not a lap infant. You don't need a birth certificate for a ticketed minor on a domestic flight." Patricia leaned over the podium, her gum snapping. "Mom, do not tell me my job. I have reason to believe the age of the child has been misrepresented to avoid fair rules, and I need to verify the identity of the cardholder." David felt the heat rising in his chest. This was nonsense. "We paid for a first-class seat for him. Whether he is 2 or 10, the seat is paid for. And my ID is in my wallet, which is at the bottom of this bag." "Then I suggest you dig it out," Patricia said, crossing her arms. "Or you can step aside and let the paying customers board." "I am a paying customer," David said, his voice dropping an octave. "I'm Dr. David Carter. This is my family. We are in seats 3A through 3C. Patricia let out a short, derisive laugh. "Dr. Wright, look, sir, you're holding up the line. Step aside." Behind them, the line was growing. People were craning their necks. The shame was immediate and hot. David clenched his jaw. He knew this game. If he got angry, he became the threat. If he shouted, security would come. "Fine," David said. He knelt down and unzipped his bag, rummaging for his wallet. He found it, pulled out his driver's license and slapped it on the counter. "Here." Patricia picked it up. She held it up to the light. She bent it slightly. She looked at the picture, then at David. "This photo looks different," she said. "I had a beard," David said through gritted teeth. She turned to the computer. She typed something. She typed for a long time. The boarding sign overhead blinked. The economy passengers were now lining up, watching the scene unfold. "Is there a problem?" Michelle asked, her voice trembling slightly. Patricia ignored her. She picked up the phone again. "Yeah, this is gate K12. I need a supervisor. No, actually send PD. I have a passenger becoming aggressive." David's eyes went wide. "Aggressive? I haven't raised my voice. I gave you what you asked for." Patricia looked him dead in the eye, a smirk touching the corner of her lips. "Sir, step back from the podium. You are scaring the staff." The air around gate K12 had turned poisonous. The murmurs from the line behind them were audible now. "What's taking so long? Probably didn't pay for the upgrade. Just let them through, for God's sake." David took a step back, holding his hands up, palms open. The universal sign of surrender. "I am stepping back. I am standing right here. I am not aggressive. I just want to board the flight with my family." Michelle placed a hand on David's arm. Her grip was tight. "David, she's baiting you. Don't give her anything." The young agent next to Patricia looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. He glanced at the screen, then at David. "Patty," he whispered. "The system shows they're cleared. The payment is verified. It's an Amex black card." Patricia spun on her heel, her back to the Carters, and hissed at the boy. "Quiet, Jason. You're new. You don't know how to spot fraud. These people book with stolen miles or stolen cards all the time. Look at them. Does that look like first class to you?" Jason, the young agent, glanced at David's high-end, albeit casual hoodie, and Michelle's boutique travel bag. "Actually, yeah, they look..." "Quiet," Patricia snapped. She turned back to the Carters. "The system is flagging your reservation." She lied smoothly. "It seems the credit card used to book this flight has been reported as suspicious. Until we can verify ownership with the bank, I cannot let you board." "That is a lie," David said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I used that card to buy coffee 10 minutes ago. I am a neurosurgeon at Northwestern Memorial. You can Google me right now." "I don't have time to Google you, bro," Patricia said, using the slang like a weapon. "And the bank verification department is closed. It's 6:00 p.m. "Banks don't close at 6:00 p.m. for fraud alerts," Michelle cried out. Leo woke up at the sound of her voice and started to cry. The sound pierced the tension. "Great," Patricia muttered loud enough for the first few rows of economy to hear. "Now the kid is screaming. We can't have a disruption like that in the cabin anyway." Suddenly the door to the jet bridge opened from the inside. A flight attendant peeked her head out. "Patricia, we're waiting on 3A, B, and C. Captain wants to push back early to beat the snow." "There's an issue with the passengers," Patricia said loudly. "Security is en route, but don't worry, I have standby passengers ready to fill the seats." David's blood ran cold. Standby passengers. He looked to the side of the podium. Standing there, leaning against the wall, was a man in a tan trench coat. He was tall, silver-haired, and looked distinctly impatient. Next to him was a younger woman, perhaps an assistant, and 2 other men in suits. They didn't look like standby passengers. They looked like they expected to be there. The man in the trench coat caught Patricia's eye and tapped his watch. Patricia gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. David saw it. He saw the connection. This wasn't about IDs. This wasn't about credit cards. This was a bump. An illegal, targeted bump to clear the premium cabin for someone Patricia wanted or needed to accommodate. "You're giving our seats away," David said, pointing at the man in the trench coat. "That's what this is. Who is he?" "That is none of your business," Patricia snapped. She typed 3 keystrokes. Clack, clack, clack. The printer behind her whirred. She ripped the paper off. "I have removed you from the flight due to non-compliance and security risk. You will be rebooked on the..." Let's see. 6:00 a.m. flight tomorrow, in economy. That is the best I can do." "You can't do that," Michelle shouted. "My sister's wedding rehearsal is tomorrow morning." "You should have thought of that before you acted up at my gate," Patricia said, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She looked over David's shoulder. "Officers over here." 2 Chicago police officers were jogging down the concourse. They saw a black man in a hoodie standing aggressively close to a female gate agent, his wife shouting. They saw what Patricia wanted them to see. One of the officers, a burly man with a mustache, put his hand on his belt. "Sir, back away from the counter, now." "I haven't done anything," David pleaded, turning to the cops. "She's stealing our seats. I'm a doctor. I have my family here." "Sir, I'm not going to ask you again," the officer barked, closing the distance. "Grab your bags and walk away, or you're leaving in cuffs." David looked at the officer, then at Patricia. Patricia was smiling. It was a small, tight smile of absolute victory. She turned to the man in the trench coat. "Mr. Pellington, so sorry for the delay. If you and your party would please step forward. We have 3 seats open in first class, just for you." Mr. Pellington stepped forward, not even looking at David. He handed a platinum card to Patricia. "Thank you, Patricia," Pellington said, his voice like gravel. "I'll mention your efficiency to Bob." "Happy to help, sir," she cooed. David felt Michelle's hand pulling him back. "David, stop, please. Think of Leo. Don't let them arrest you." David looked at his son, who was now wailing in Michelle's arms. He looked at the passengers staring at him with a mix of pity and suspicion. He looked at Jason, the young agent who was staring at his shoes in shame. And then he saw something else. Sitting in the front row of the waiting area, a teenager with purple hair was holding up an iPhone. The red recording dot was on. The lens was pointed directly at Patricia Higgins. David took a deep breath. He straightened his spine. He was a surgeon. He knew how to play the long game. He knew that sometimes, to save the patient, you had to stop cutting and wait. "Okay," David said, his voice eerily calm. "We are leaving." He looked Patricia dead in the eyes. "You have made a mistake, Patricia. You think you just bumped a nobody. I want you to remember this moment." Patricia laughed. "Bye-bye, doctor. Enjoy the motel." As the officers escorted the humiliated family away from the gate, Patricia scanned Mr. Pellington's boarding pass. The scanner beeped green. "Welcome aboard," she said. She thought the problem was gone. She thought the noise would disappear into the snowy Chicago night. She didn't know that the teenager with the purple hair had just hit upload on TikTok. And she certainly didn't know that Bob, the man Pellington mentioned, wasn't just a manager. He was Robert McKinnon, the CEO of Meridian Airways. But the real twist wasn't about the CEO. It was about who David Carter was calling as he walked away from the gate, his phone pressed to his ear. His face, a mask of cold, calculated fury. "Hello, Senator. Yes, it's David. I need a favor. A big one. No, it's federal." The air inside the first-class cabin of Meridian Flight 492 was noticeably different from the terminal. It smelled of warmed nut sanitizer and money. Arthur Pellington slid his bulk into seat 3A, the seat David Carter had paid for 3 months ago. Pellington let out a groan of relief, unbuttoning his suit jacket. He was a man whose face looked like it was made of sourdough dough that had been punched a few times, puffy pale and perpetually sweating. "Champagne, Mr. Pellington?" a flight attendant asked, hovering nervously. She had seen the commotion at the gate. She knew this man wasn't on the manifest until 5 minutes ago. "Double." "No ice." Pellington grunted. He didn't say, "Please." He turned to the man in 3B, his associate, a shark-eyed lawyer named Greg. "See, I told you. Patricia always comes through. Meridian knows who butters the bread." Greg looked less comfortable. He checked the window, watching the flashing lights of the police cruiser that was currently receiving the Carter family down on the tarmac level. That was messy, Arthur. That guy, he didn't look like a nobody. He said he was a surgeon. Pellington waved a hand dismissively. Everyone's a surgeon or a lawyer when they're trying to keep their seat. He was nobody. Did you see the hoodie? Probably a diversity hire trying to flash status. Besides, Bob owes me. I got that antitrust regulation killed in the Senate last week. Meridian saved $2 billion because of me. I think I deserve a seat to Atlanta. He took a sip of the champagne the moment it landed on his tray table. But there was something Pellington was hiding. His hands shook slightly as he held the glass. He reached down to his briefcase, a battered leather attaché that he had refused to let Patricia check, even though it was slightly too large for the underseat storage. He patted it. "Is the file in there?" Greg whispered, leaning in. "The only copy," Pellington whispered back. "Hard drive and the physical ledger. If the SEC gets this, Meridian stock goes to zero and I go to federal prison. We get this to Bob in Atlanta. Tonight he burns it and we're clear." Pellington chuckled darkly. "That gate agent, Patricia. She thinks she just did a favor for a VIP. She has no idea she just acted as an accessory to obstruction of justice." Back inside the terminal, the gate area was clearing out. The jet bridge door was closed. Patricia Higgins sat back in her chair, feeling the adrenaline dump. She popped a fresh piece of gum into her mouth. She felt powerful. She had protected the airline's interests. She had removed a disruptive passenger. She had maintained order. Her computer pinged with an internal message. It was from the station manager. "Subject flight 492. Closeout message. Good work on the turnaround, Pat." Bob McKinnon's office called. They wanted to make sure Pellington got on. "You made it happen." Patricia smiled. "That's right," she murmured to herself. "I made it happen." She looked over at Jason, the young agent who was still staring at his screen, looking pale. "What is your problem?" she snapped. I'm reading the notes on the passenger you bumped," Jason said quietly. "Dr. David Carter. I checked his frequent flyer history. Who cares? He's probably silver status at best. He's Global Services Patricia, invitation only. And I Googled him." Jason turned the monitor slightly. "He's not just a surgeon. He's the chief of neurosurgery at Northwestern. And last year he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his work in pediatric trauma." Patricia's chewing slowed. She squinted at the screen. There was David Carter shaking hands with the President of the United States. "So," Patricia said, though her voice lacked its usual bite, "being a doctor doesn't give you the right to be aggressive." "I also checked the credit card again," Jason said. "It wasn't flagged. The system error code you cited, error 40422, that's the code for manual override, agent discretion. You manually blocked him." "Jason," Patricia said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "if you value your job, you will clear that screen and go tag bags for the next flight. The man was a security threat. I made a judgment call. End of story." Jason swallowed hard. "Okay, Patricia." But as Jason walked away, he didn't go to the bag tag printer. He went to the employee break room. He took out his phone. He opened the Notes app and typed date deck for TARS. Flight 492. Gate agent P. Higgins manually overrode valid ticket for Dr. David Carter to seat A. Pellington. Pellington claimed to be personal friend of CEO. Family escorted by PD. I was ordered to stay silent. Jason was young, but he wasn't stupid. He knew what a scapegoat looked like, and he had no intention of being one. The wind outside Terminal 3 cut through David's hoodie like a knife. It was snowing harder now, big wet flakes that melted on contact with the asphalt. They were standing on the curb, the smell of exhaust fumes and despair thick in the air. Leo was screaming a high-pitched, exhausted wail that grated on the nerves. Michelle was shivering, not just from the cold, but from the shock. They treated us like criminals, David. She sobbed, wiping mascara from her cheek. Everyone was staring. That woman, she looked at me like I was dirt. David didn't answer immediately. He was busy loading their luggage into the trunk of a Toyota Camry Uber that had seen better days. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from a rage so profound it felt like a physical weight in his chest. He slammed the trunk shut. "Get in the car, baby. Get Leo out of the cold." They climbed into the back seat. The car smelled of stale cigarettes and vanilla air freshener. "Where to?" the driver asked, looking at them in the rearview mirror with mild curiosity. "The nearest hotel that has a room," David said. "I don't care which one. Just get us away from this airport." As the car pulled into traffic, David pulled out his phone. 42% battery. He scrolled past his contacts, fellow doctors, hospital administrators, family. He stopped at a name he hadn't called in 2 years. Senator Thomas Halloway. 2 years ago, Senator Halloway's granddaughter had been brought into Northwestern with a traumatic brain injury after a horse-riding accident. Every other surgeon said it was inoperable. David had operated for 14 hours. The girl was now a sophomore in college on the dean's list. Halloway had given David his personal cell number. "Day or night, David. You ever need anything at all?" David pressed call. It rang 4 times. "Hello, this is Tom." The voice was gruff, tired. "Senator, it's David Carter." There was a pause, then the voice brightened instantly. "David, my God, I was just looking at a picture of you and Sarah. Is everything okay? You calling about the hospital, funding?" "No, Tom. I'm calling because I'm in a beat-up Uber outside O'Hare with my wife and 3-year-old son. We just got thrown off Meridian Flight 492 by police because a gate agent wanted our first-class seats for a buddy of the CEO." "Excuse me." The senator's voice dropped. "Did you say Meridian?" "Yes. A woman named Patricia Higgins. She claimed fraud, claimed I was aggressive. She humiliated us, Tom. But that's not the worst part." David looked out the window at the blurry lights of the highway. "The man they gave my seat to. I recognized him from the news. It was Arthur Pellington." Silence on the other end. A long, heavy silence. "David," the senator said slowly, "are you absolutely certain? I was standing 3 feet from him. Trench coat, scar above the left eyebrow, smoked like a chimney. The agent called him Mr. Pellington, and he mentioned he was meeting Bob Robert McKinnon in Atlanta. Holy Mother of—" The senator's voice trailed off. "David, listen to me carefully. Arthur Pellington is currently under a federal subpoena. He was supposed to surrender his passport to the Department of Justice at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow in D.C. He claimed he was bedridden with pneumonia to get a continuance." David's grip on the phone tightened. "Well, his pneumonia seems just fine. He's drinking champagne in seat 3A right now. If he is on that plane," Halloway said, his voice turning into the steel trap of a career prosecutor, "he is fleeing the jurisdiction, and if Meridian Airways knowingly facilitated his travel after the DOJ flagged him, that's not just a customer service issue. That's aiding and abetting a federal fugitive." "What do you need me to do?" David asked. "Nothing," Halloway said. "Go to your hotel, hug your wife, keep your phone charged. I'm calling the FAA, and then I'm calling the FBI field office in Atlanta. When that plane lands, it's not going to be a gate agent greeting Mr. Pellington." David hung up. He looked at Michelle. She had stopped crying and was staring at him. "Who was that?" she whispered. That, David said, leaning back and closing his eyes, was the cavalry. The Uber pulled up to a Motel 6. It was the only place with vacancy. The neon sign flickered, buzzing loudly. No vacancy lit up just as they arrived. They had the last room. As they dragged their Louis Vuitton bags into the lobby, which smelled of chlorine and old carpet, Michelle reached into her pocket. "David," she said, "I didn't want to say anything in front of the police, but I have something." She pulled out her phone. I started a voice memo when she asked for the birth certificate. I have the whole thing. I have her admitting she bumped us for a VIP. I have her mocking you. David took the phone. He looked at the file. Recording 44 to Hemmefore. 12 minutes. "Don't post it yet," David said. "Not yet. We wait until morning. We let them think they got away with it." While the Carters tried to sleep in a room where the heater rattled like a chainsaw, the internet was waking up. Chloe Vance, screen name, A Chloe all accept. The Observer was sitting in the airport food court waiting for her delayed flight to Denver. She was bored. She had a video on her phone that she had taken an hour ago. She opened TikTok. She uploaded the clip. It was shaky at first, but the audio was crystal clear. Patricia's voice. "I don't have time to Google you, bro." The image a distinguished black man pleading calmly while a gate agent rolled her eyes. The climax. The man in the trench coat Pellington slipping the agent a credit card and smirking as the family was led away by police. Chloe added the caption, "Meridian Airways agent kicks off doctor for VIP friend. I don't have time to Google you. Mos Meridian Airways, lost racist, lost Karen or Sask O'Hara." She hit post, 8:00 p.m., 12 views. 9:30 p.m., 450 views. 11:00 p.m., 15,000 views. At 11:15 p.m., a popular travel blogger named Mile High Max saw it. He had 2 million followers. He quote-tweeted the TikTok video on X Twitter. Max's tweet, "I've seen bad gate agents, but this is next level. Meridian Airways care to explain why you had the police drag a calm family away, so this guy in the trench coat could board. Also, does anyone recognize the guy in the coat? Cancel 1:00 a.m. The video hit 1.5 million views. The internet sleuths went to work. User @EagleEye22 posted a screenshot of the man in the trench coat next to a news article from the Washington Post. Tweet, "Wait a minute. Is that Arthur Pellington, the lobbyist involved in the clean water scandal? Isn't he supposed to be under house arrest?" User Ahmed Twitter jumped in. Tweet, "I recognize that passenger. That is Dr. David Carter. He saved my nephew's life. He is a literal hero. Meridian Airways, you just messed with the wrong doctor." By 3:00 a.m., the hashtags "Just Boycott Meridian" and "Where is Pellington" were trending number 1 and number 2 in the United States. Inside the Meridian Airways social media command center in Dallas, a lone night shift intern named Sarah saw the red lights flashing on her dashboard. Mention volume had spiked 4,000% in the last hour. She clicked the tag. She watched the video. She read the comments. "Oh no," she whispered. She picked up the emergency phone to call the VP of Public Relations. "I know it's 3 a.m., sir," she stammered when he answered. "But we have a situation, a catastrophic one, and I think the FBI is being tagged." Back at the Motel 6, David's phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then it began to vibrate continuously, a steady hum against the cheap nightstand. David woke up. He groggily reached for the phone. The screen was blinded by notifications. Texts from colleagues, emails from reporters, and one text from Senator Holloway. Holloway turned on the TV. CNN. Now. David grabbed the remote and turned on the small television mounted in the corner. The news anchor looked grave. The banner at the bottom read, "Breaking news. Fugitive lobbyist spotted on Meridian flight. We are receiving reports." The anchor said that Arthur Pellington, a key witness in the ongoing energy sector corruption trial, may have fled the country last night on a domestic flight to Atlanta, aided by airline staff who removed a family to make room for him. A viral video appears to show the transaction taking place. The screen cut to Chloe's TikTok video. There was Patricia, magnified on national television, snapping her gum. David looked at Michelle, who was now awake and sitting up, eyes wide. "They know," Michelle whispered. "They know," David said, "and the plane lands in 20 minutes. David's phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello. Dr. Carter." A slick, panicked voice on the other end. "This is Richard Sterling, Senior VP of Customer Experience for Meridian Airways. We seem to have had a terrible misunderstanding at O'Hare. We would like to offer you a full refund and perhaps a voucher." David laughed. It was a cold, hard laugh. "Mr. Sterling," David said, "you're going to need a lot more than a voucher. You're going to need a criminal defense attorney." He hung up. "Get dressed," David said to Michelle. "We have a press conference to give." The wheels of Meridian Flight 492 screeched against the wet tarmac of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. It was 8:45 a.m. Inside the first-class cabin, Arthur Pellington stretched his legs, feeling the satisfying pop of his knees. He had slept soundly, aided by 3 glasses of champagne and the arrogant assurance that he was untouchable. He checked his watch. He had plenty of time to meet Robert McKinnon Bob at the private hangar on the other side of the airfield, hand over the physical ledger, and disappear to a non-extradition country in the Caribbean before the DOJ even realized he had skipped his morning meeting. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Atlanta," the flight attendant announced, her voice wavering slightly. "Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate." Pellington smirked at his lawyer, Greg. "Easy. We walk off. We get in the car, we're gone." But as the plane taxied, Greg frowned, looking out the window. "Arthur, why are we stopping here? This isn't the gate." Pellington looked out. They were on a remote apron far from the terminal. The engines whined down into silence. The cabin lights flickered on, bright and harsh. "Probably a gate hold," Pellington grunted, reaching for his briefcase. "Traffic is terrible." Then the pilot's voice came over the intercom. It wasn't the usual, "Thanks for flying with us" speech. It was tight-clipped and serious. "Folks, this is the captain. We've been directed by air traffic control to hold our position on the tarmac. We have been informed that federal authorities need to board the aircraft. Please remain in your seats and keep the aisle clear. Do not, I repeat, do not stand up." A ripple of confusion went through the cabin. Pellington froze. His hand hovered over the latch of his briefcase. "Arthur," Greg whispered, his face draining of color. "They found us." "Shut up," Pellington hissed. "They can't know. Patricia wiped the manifest. My name isn't on the list." Through the window, blue and red lights erupted in the grey morning mist. It wasn't just one car. It was a fleet. 3 black SUVs with government plates and 2 Atlanta PD cruisers swarmed the plane. A mobile stairway truck raced toward the forward cabin door. The first-class cabin fell dead silent. Every passenger turned to look at Pellington, the man in the trench coat who had bumped the family in Chicago. The cabin door opened with a heavy mechanical thud. Cold air rushed in. 2 men in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI stepped onto the plane, followed closely by a U.S. Marshal. They didn't look at the flight attendants. They didn't look at the other passengers. The lead agent, a tall man with a buzz cut, held up a tablet. He looked at the seat assignment, then looked directly at seat 3A. "Arthur Pellington," the agent boomed. Pellington tried to bluff. He stayed seated, feigning confusion. I think there's a mistake. I'm just traveling for business. Arthur Pellington. The agent repeated, stepping closer, his hand resting on his holster. You are under arrest for flight to avoid prosecution, obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Stand up, hands where I can see them. This is harassment, Pellington shouted, finally standing up, his sourdough face turning beet red. Do you know who I am? I am a personal friend of Robert McKinnon. I will have your badges. Mr. McKinnon is currently having a similar conversation with our colleagues at his office, the agent said calmly. Turn around. The click of the handcuffs was loud in the silent cabin. As they hauled Pellington into the aisle, the agent looked at the briefcase under the seat. Is that the bag? That's it, the second agent said, bagging it as evidence. The ledger. Pellington was dragged off the plane, kicking and screaming obscenities about his lawyer. As he was led down the stairs, the passengers in economy, who had been watching through the gaps in the curtain, broke into spontaneous applause. But the FBI wasn't done. The lead agent stopped at the cockpit. He looked at the pilot. Captain, we need the flight manifest and the digital logs from the gate agent in Chicago. We have a warrant for the electronic communications of one Patricia Higgins. The next morning, Chicago O'Hare. The storm had broken. The heavy, suffocating grey skies that had choked Chicago the previous evening had given way to a brilliant, piercing blue. The sun reflected off the snow-covered tarmac, creating a world that looked scrubbed clean. Patricia Higgins parked her car in the employee lot, stepping out into the crisp air. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of jet fuel and de-icing fluid, the perfume of her profession. She felt light, buoyant even. Before leaving her house, she had checked the internal flight logs one last time. Meridian Flight 492 had landed in Atlanta on schedule. The manifest was closed. Pellington was gone. She adjusted her scarf, checking her reflection in the side mirror. She looked like a woman who got things done. In her mind, the previous night's unpleasantness was already a fading memory, a necessary skirmish to protect the airline's bottom line. She imagined the email she would likely receive later that day from the station manager, or perhaps even a handwritten note from Bob McKinnon himself. Patricia, your discretion is invaluable. Maybe a bonus. Maybe that promotion to terminal lead she had been coveting for 5 years. She walked toward the employee entrance of Terminal 3 with a stride that commanded attention. She was the queen of gate K-12, and her reign was secure. She reached the security turnstile, a familiar steel gate she had passed through thousands of times. She fished her ID badge, her key to the kingdom, from her purse and tapped it against the black plastic reader with a practiced flick of her wrist. Beep, beep. A harsh red light flashed on the small LCD screen. Access denied. Patricia frowned, her brow furrowing in annoyance. Stupid machine, she muttered, assuming it was the cold affecting the sensors. She rubbed the magnetic strip of her badge against her navy blue skirt, wiping away invisible dust, and tapped it again, harder this time. Beep, beep. Access denied. Oh, come on, she groaned. She looked through the plexiglass partition at the security desk. Jerry, a guard she had known for a decade, a man she often shared gossip with over stale coffee, was sitting there. He was staring intensely at his logbook, his shoulders hunched. Hey, Jerry, she yelled, rapping her knuckles against the glass. System's glitching again. Buzz me through, I'm running late for the morning briefing. Jerry didn't look up. He didn't reach for the buzzer. He didn't smile. He turned a page in his logbook with agonizing slowness, his posture rigid. Jerry, she snapped, her patience vaporizing. I am talking to you, open the gate. Finally, Jerry looked up. There was no warmth in his eyes, only a mixture of pity and fear. He shook his head slowly. I can't do that, Pat. What do you mean you can't? I'm the senior gate agent. I have a shift in 10 minutes. Not anymore, a deep baritone voice said from directly behind her. Patricia spun around. The blood drained from her face so fast it left her dizzy. Standing there were not airline managers, but two men in charcoal suits that fit too well to be airport security. They wore earpieces and serious expressions. Behind them stood the terminal manager, a man named Henderson, who usually greeted her with a smile. Today he looked like he was about to vomit. He was staring at the floor, refusing to meet her gaze. Patricia Higgins, the taller of the two suits, asked. He didn't sound like he was asking a question. He sounded like he was reading a verdict. Yes, she stammered, clutching her purse. Who are you? I'm Special Agent Miller, Department of Transportation, Office of Inspector General. This is Agent Lewis from the FBI. The world tilted on its axis. The sounds of the airport, the distant announcements, the rolling luggage, the hum of the conveyors seemed to fade into a dull roar. FBI. Patricia let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh. Is this a joke? Is this about the computer glitch? It's not a glitch. Ms. Higgins, Agent Miller said. He reached behind his back and produced a pair of stainless steel handcuffs. They glinted in the morning sun. We are placing you under arrest. Arrest! Patricia shrieked, the sound echoing off the concrete walls of the employee corridor. For what I just did my job, I bumped a passenger. That is standard procedure. That's not a crime, or bumping a passenger isn't a crime, Miller said, stepping into her personal space. He took her wrist, his grip firm and professional. But manually overriding a federal security protocol error code 442 to aid a known fugitive is. Falsifying a federal flight manifest to conceal the identity of a passenger under subpoena is a felony. And accepting a wire transfer of $5,000 from an offshore account linked to Arthur Pellington, which hit your bank account at 4 a.m. this morning, is wire fraud. Patricia's knees buckled. She felt the cold steel lock around her wrists. The money. She hadn't even checked her account yet. She looked frantically at the terminal manager. Mr. Henderson, help me tell them Bob told me to do it. Bob McKinnon called the desk. Bob resigned an hour ago, Patricia. Henderson said, his voice barely a whisper. The board of directors fired him for cause. Meridian Airways is cooperating fully with the federal investigation. You're on your own. They didn't take her out the back way. Perhaps it was protocol, or perhaps it was a specific instruction to make an example of her. But the agents marched Patricia Higgins right through the main concourse of Terminal 3. It was the perp walk of the century. As she was led past the Hudson newsstand and the Starbucks heads turned, the airport was buzzing with the morning rush, but a hush fell over the crowd as they saw the Meridian uniform in cuffs. People pointed, phones were raised. The cameras that Patricia had so arrogantly dismissed the night before were now everywhere documenting her downfall. They walked her past, Gate K-12. The morning flight to Atlanta, the 9:00 a.m. departure she had sarcastically rebooked the Carter family on, was boarding. The line of passengers paused, watching the spectacle, and there, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window waiting for his group to be called, was Dr. David Carter. He looked different. The grey hoodie and sweatpants were gone. He was dressed in a sharp navy blazer and a crisp white shirt, looking every bit the distinguished surgeon he was. He held a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't recording. He was simply watching. Patricia locked eyes with him. In that split second, the power dynamic that had defined their interaction the night before was completely inverted. Her arrogance, her chewing gum, her key to the kingdom. It was all dust. She looked small. She looked terrified. She looked like exactly what she was, a bully who had been caught. David didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He didn't say a word. He simply raised his coffee cup in a silent, solemn toast. Acknowledgement. Then he turned his back to her and looked out at the runway, watching the planes take flight. The fallout was not just a ripple, it was a tsunami. The story of the gate agent and the surgeon dominated the national news cycle for weeks. Chloe Vance's TikTok video was played on CNN, Fox News, and the BBC. It became the defining image of corporate arrogance. Meridian Airways nearly collapsed. The airline's stock plummeted 18% in 3 days as the hashtag #Joshua-boycott-Meridian trended globally. To save the company, the board conducted a brutal purge. The CEO, Robert McKinnon, was indicted for conspiracy. The VP of Customer Experience was fired. The settlement was swift and historic. David Carter sued Meridian Airways for racial discrimination, defamation, and breach of contract. Desperate to keep the details of their internal VIP bumping policies out of a public courtroom, the airline settled. The amount was never officially disclosed, but financial analysts estimated the payout was upwards of $10 million. The villain Patricia Higgins turned state's evidence. She testified against Pellington and McKinnon to avoid a 20-year prison sentence. However, she did not escape justice. She was sentenced to 6 months of strict house arrest, 5 years of federal probation, and in a twist of poetic justice was placed on the permanent federal no-fly list. The woman who had treated the airport as her personal fiefdom would never step foot in one again. The hero Dr. David Carter didn't buy a yacht. He didn't move to a private island. He took the settlement money and did exactly what a man of his character would do. He established the Leo Carter Foundation for Pediatric Equity. The non-profit had a simple mission. It chartered private medical flights for children in rural and underserved communities who needed life-saving surgeries at major metropolitan hospitals. No gate agents, no bumping. Just care. 6 months later, David Carter was back at O'Hare. He was flying to a neurosurgery conference in Boston. He walked up to the gate. The podium was the same, but the vibe was different. A new agent was standing there, a young woman with a bright, genuine smile. "Good morning, Dr. Carter," she said, scanning his boarding pass. The machine beeped a pleasant green. "Thank you for flying with us. We have you in seat 1A today. The captain asked me to personally welcome you aboard." "Thank you," David said softly. He walked down the jet bridge, the sound of his footsteps echoing on the metal. As he reached the door of the plane, he paused. He tapped the side of the fuselage twice with his palm. It was a new superstition, a reminder. He realized then that karma isn't just about revenge. It's about balance. It doesn't always have a boarding pass, and it doesn't always fly first class, but if you wait long enough, it always arrives on time. David smiled, ducked his head, and stepped onto the plane. What a ride. From a power-tripping gate agent to a federal investigation, the story of David Carter and Patricia Higgins proves one undeniable fact: you never really know who you are talking to. Patricia thought she was crushing a nobody in a hoodie. Instead, she dismantled her own life, took down a corrupt CEO, and accidentally funded a charity that will save thousands of lives. It is a harsh, necessary lesson in humility, dignity, and the terrifying, wonderful power of the truth. The world is watching. Be kind. If this story got your blood boiling and your justice boner raging, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells YouTube you want more real-life dramas like this. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you're the first to know when the next story drops. I've got a wild one coming up next week about a HOA president who tried to tow an undercover FBI surveillance van. Trust me, you do not want to miss that. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and remember, treat people with respect, or you might end up on the no-fly list. See you in the next one.